And this is where I differ probably from everyone in the corner, except for maybe you and a few other people. But I think games are, I'm going to say it, I think they're the highest form of art, or I think they have the potential to
Mhm.
be
I think that's much closer.
yeah, yeah, okay. The greatest form of art. And the reason I say that is because when sculpture or painting began on caves, cave walls or whatever, um, it wasn't super refined. It wasn't the Renaissance yet, and that's where we are with games right now. We are 50 years into games as an art form. So
Mhm.
they're still really in their infancy as an art form. Um, Not to say we haven't had amazing games like Minecraft or StarCraft, or all the crafts tend to be really good. I don't know why, but they tend to. But it's in its infancy, and here's the reason why I think they are going to be the highest art form, or they are, but they're still just an art form. They're still just an abstraction. They're not the end all and be all. That's the danger. Anyway, the reason is because all other art forms can be included in a game. And the reason for that is because games, to the extent that they're good games, this is me, Neal, what I think. To the extent they're good games, they are emulating something real about our existence. They're emulating something to the best of their ability to emulate that resonates with our own being. They wouldn't captivate us such if that wasn't the case.
Hey everyone, just wanted to lead this video in. In this video, I talked to Neal, and we have a great conversation about a whole bunch of different topics, and we kind of are constantly jumping around for a good like hour and a half. Um, just wanted to warn you, there's going to be a lot of topics that might be a little confusing to people who just watch my channel and not any of the channels Neal is on. So I'm going to link a bunch of kind of resources below um, of different YouTube channels that we kind of briefly mention, other videos he's in, and a few other people that we talk about. Um, if you want, feel free to look around at those resources, treat it as a game, and just try to learn. But I'm not going to try to go out of my way to give a background. I think it might be fun just to let it be. So we deal with all sorts of stuff from art to video games to um, some philosophy too. And this is hopefully the first of many conversations that Neal and I have, and I hope you all enjoy it.
So I am here with Mr. Noah Foxman, President Foxman. Um, I think that I probably had the longest delay of anyone I've talked to yet within the corner between when I started talking to Noah and when, well, Noah, and when this actually occurred. So that's been good and bad, because the bad side is like, oh man, I have so much in common with this guy. I really, really want to talk to him. And I've just been waiting. But the good side is that I've got a ton of topics that we can talk about. And just in getting to know you a little bit better through your conversation with Christian Baxter and then your conversation with Chad, yeah, those topics just keep coming up. And so things like I'll just throw out some really broad things that we could talk about. And group dynamics, group interactions, interdenominational relationships, evaluating quality in art, uh, game develop. So this is my topic: game development as self-exploration, music and beauty. That's probably going to be more in Chad's realm. Video games and first person versus third person view. And that's not even, that's just scraping the surface of what I got. So
Yeah.
yeah, we could start wherever you want and go from there.
Well, how about we start with video game development? Because I'm kind of on the outside. I'm doing a lot more playing of video games. I know you're working on video games, and so um, Yeah, where were you thinking with that for a little bit on that side?
Yeah, so I sort of stumbled into it.
Hmm.
I've talked about this before, but I'll give you the cliff notes. Um, when I was in my, I would say the darkest time of my life, or the most difficult time of my life, I would say. But often, the best things come from those times if you stick with it, and that's been at least my experience. And if you stay optimistic. But during that darkest time, one of the things that was key to getting me through it was creative exploration in some way, shape, or form. Because, for example, Jordan Peterson talks about, if you're a creative person, you have to express it or you'll die. I think that's the way he actually said that. Like you have to
Hmm.
express it. And in my darkness, I was going through a religious transformation at the time and a religious conversion. But I was still confused about that because despite going through that transformation, it was not sufficient. But I guess I wasn't that confused because based on that advice from JBP, I knew that I needed that creative outlet. And church, you can do a lot of things in church, but it's very difficult to be creative unless you're specifically tasked with the role. Now, Jonathan Pageau, icon carver, I'm sure he could bring his creative talents to bear. But especially as like a neophyte, as a brand new person coming into the church, that's not the kind of door that's going to be open to me. And I understood that. So it wasn't like I had a sense of entitlement to it, but it was more like, oh man, it's almost like church was and everything with my faith practice was like the foundation, like the things that were keeping me going. But I needed something to aim to the highest almost. It's like your first fruits bring to God. And so what I started doing is I started waking up about an hour earlier every day, and I just started. I had this crazy idea for a story in my head, and that's where it started from, actually. And I had written a book previously that went precisely nowhere, but I had this story and it wouldn't go away. Like I had it for 3 months in my maybe more like 6 months, and it would continue developing in my head, and I did not want to write it because it was the kind of story where I was like, the best thing that could happen is no one ever reads this because it's gonna piss off everyone. Like I'm gonna be if people actually read this story, I'm gonna be alienated from my family, my friends, my church. Like it's gonna piss off both sides of the political spectrum. I was like, there's nothing good that can come from this story, so I didn't want to write it. Like I didn't want to write it, and not only that, like I didn't even think the story was moral at times. Like there were certain aspects of the story where I'm like, this is not good behavior. Like if I
Hmm.
write once and I'm like, so I'm just like kind of praying about this story and I'm thinking like, what the heck, God? Like, why won't this go away? And and so at some point, I think I was going through my worst time where I was going to church every day, my mass every day. First thing, that's one nice thing about Catholicism is we do have a morning, typically morning daily church service that's typically available. And that helped me kind of start the day and get through the day. But I don't know. I reached the point where I'm just like, I have to write it. Like I have to start on this thing. And so I woke up about an hour early every day before work and I would write. And as I was writing, I realized this was a thing. And looking back on the story now, there's a lot of bile, but there's also like a lot of really good stuff. And a lot of but I would just wake up and I'd write. And about halfway, so getting to game development, sorry, that's a long preamble. So about
No
halfway through
worries.
writing it, um, I realized like, oh geez, this is best construed as a role-playing game.
Hmm.
And I realized that for a few reasons. So number one was that, you know, our generation, and this is, I think, only becoming more true with time, our generation doesn't read novels anymore. And I talked to Kale about this a little bit on the meanderings with Chad and Kale. It's like we've kind of taken for granted that that a novel is the standard art form for telling story. Like that's the
Mhm.
way stories are told. But that's only been true for 250 years or something, maybe even less than that, to be honest. Um, most of the time, for most of human history, stories were told at taverns, around a campfire, personal experience, in poems that could be remembered, right? So not things that were specifically written down and intended to be read or digested that way. And what I realized is that, well, one, people of our generation that I really was hoping to communicate with, um, were getting their stories through games, through TV shows, through serial productions of various kinds. But then the second thing was the interactive nature of games, video games, and stories. In that, like these questions I was wrestling with in the telling of the story, like the deepest questions, like why are we even here? Like what is the point? Um, like those were questions that I realized that you can wrestle with those in a telling of a conventional story, but to actually engage in those questions in a game, like your when you were talking about nihilism in your Fallout episode, to actually walk through it and experience it. It's obviously it's not the same extent, but it's not the same extent as doing it, let's say.
Mhm.
But e- it's easier to place yourself in the shoes of someone who thinks that way, and then also realizing the full extent of either the horror or the truth of whatever that is. And so I had this realization. It's best construed as a game. In college, I attempted to minor in computer science. And in the first class that's math majors have to take, and usually math majors struggle with it, I got a B plus. And I was like, yeah, I'm doing okay. And my dad's a programmer. So there was sort of this expectation that like I'd be good at it too. And then I get to the second class, which is called data structures, and I get a D. And I retake it, I do okay, but I'm like syntax, man, like colons and reading the language, and like I would forget. Logic was not an issue for me. That wasn't the issue. It was like I couldn't translate what was happening on the screen to what I wanted the program to do. And I realized it just wasn't for me. And so I dropped it and did other things. And so as I was writing this story, you know how Peterson talks about you got to enter into the darkness or sorry, you got to enter into the forest where it's darkest. I had that sense that, man, because I've always been afraid of, well, A, I've been afraid of failure. I think that's everybody. But B, specifically, I've been afraid of, let's say, programming because it was always an area where I had an inferiority complex in relation to my father, in relation to my older brother. Um, and so I had this fear, and I had this growing, and as I was writing, I had this growing building intuition, it was really a realization where I was like, this has to be a game. It's like, and kind of the um dread of that. That might be a good way of putting it, like the dread. So I was dreading two things. I was dreading three things actually as I was finishing writing it. So one, I was dreading, talked about this, right? That I would try to learn how to program or make a game or whatever, and it would be too hard and it's beyond me and I fail. And that led into the second dread, which is like, okay, the only thing that's keeping me out of my depression is this creative endeavor. So if I finish it, like, and I can't program, then what? Like, then I have nothing left. Like, then what? And then the third one was like, okay, what if I can? The third thing I was dreading was, what if I can figure it out, but I hate it? And like I don't even love writing, but like I like writing, especially at that time where I just needed to get so much out of me. And so I like writing, and I was like, well, so what if I know this is the medium, but then I hate the medium? Like it's just, dragging my feet, and it's just, awful. So I was dreading all three of those things. And so it was early 2020, and I was about three-quarters done with what I was writing. So I wrote all through 2019, early 2020. And then my daughter turns 3 in February of 2020, and I traveled a lot for business at that time, and she was hitting the age where she was like, "Daddy, don't go," every time I'm about to leave. And then COVID hit, and I was not going anywhere. And so I finished writing the story. It was like 500 some pages in May of 2020. And then I'm like, I'm stuck at home anyway. What else am I gonna do? So a lot of people, I think, really came into TLC at that time. And that's where
Mhm.
TLC really blossomed because of the necessity of and then I went the full introverted route where I'm like, no, no, no. I'm still gonna get up an hour early every day, and I'm going to, even if I hate it, even if I'm terrible at it, even if I have no idea what I'm doing, I'm just gonna sit at my computer and I'm gonna try to do development for 1 hour a day. And I'm just gonna get up an hour early. So if I started work at like 7:38, and it was nice because at that time, because we weren't traveling, like I didn't have commute times and
Mhm.
all that. So that actually gave me a little bit more time, which was nice. I didn't have to get up, crazy early. But I did that for maybe no, it was like 2 or 3 months, and it took me 2 or 3 months to just figure out. Oh, well, first, and I was doing this even as I was writing. I was figuring out, okay, what game engine do I use? Because there's a whole bunch of game engines, and obviously I wasn't going to do it from scratch. And I narrowed it down to Unity or Unreal Engine. And it seemed to me like Unity was more of for handheld devices. Like it was the preferred, for apps. And what I wanted to do was like a big sprawling role-playing game. And so I decided to go with Unreal Engine. And also Unreal Engine is still free for game developers because they make their money off of revenue, off of sales. And it's very reasonable. I think what they charge is they don't charge anything up to or they don't take anything of your net revenue until you exceed a certain revenue threshold. So it's very easy to like just kind of download it and get messing around and stuff. But I mean, don't get me wrong, it's complicated. But I started, and I just started watching YouTube videos and started to play around with stuff. And the very first thing I was doing that I tried to figure out is like, okay, you start with this like what's called a mannequin, which is your pawn, your and it's this robot looking guy, like Android, like a fancy robot. And the first thing I was trying to do was like, okay, how do I substitute that with like my real dude, right?
Mhm.
Because as this novice game developer, I'm equating myself with the real dude, however he looks, right?
Mhm.
And so I'm thinking like, oh, I've gotta get myself in the game. Like that's the first thing I gotta do. I was like, very self-focused when Chad's always talking about like, what's Chad? Oh, how does he say it? The self-centeredness. That's it. Self-centeredness. Like I was very self-centered in that game endeavor. And that was a dumb place to start. I should have just been happy with the robot and just been doing other things. But anyway, so uh so it took me like 3 months how to figure out it's called retargeting, which I'm still awful at, but luckily I found a friend that's really good at it. So now I don't have to worry about it. But anyway, so yeah, you have to retarget from like so every character has what's called a skeleton. I won't go into technical details, but they have skeleton
Mhm.
like Jones, joints and bones and Jones. Anyway, that's not a real thing. Don't use that term. It's bones. Okay.
Mhm.
So you got to basically say like this part of your arm, like a femur or a tibia or whatever. It's the same. You gotta basically specify, okay, it's the same. And then anyway. Uh yeah, so it took me like 3 months to figure out how to do that. But and now it's maybe like 2 months. And then I started learning what's called blueprints, which is it's a visual scripting layer that sits above the C++ layer. So you have C++, which actually runs the engine. And, really, the programmers who really know what they're doing, they're in C++ a lot. But then there's blueprints and blueprints so I was just and blueprints is just connecting nodes. It's like I want this and then I want this and then it's gonna loop and then it's gonna so you like literally draw it basically.
Mhm.
And the more I got into blueprints, the more it made sense to me, the more I started to love it. And so then this excitement's beginning to build in me that like I can do this. And like I at every step of the way, I expected to run into something that I couldn't do in blueprints. and I kept figuring out how to do the things I wanted to do. Or maybe I couldn't do it exactly the way I wanted, but then I would have like an idea in the shower, or like I'd have a dream or like something, and I'd be like, oh, I could do it this way instead. Like I could do it in a different way and make it work. And so, and people would give me advice like, you do have to learn C++, plus plus, and I haven't found that to be necessary. And the longer I'm doing it, the more I suspect tools like AI are going to, because the whole reason to do things natively in C++ plus plus is that it runs faster. It will run faster.
Mhm.
But now you're already seeing like the start of AI programs that will look at blueprint code and will simplify it and compress it and make it like cut out all the excess. And that's only going to get better as AI gets better. So
Yeah.
anyway, that's a much longer summary than you probably were looking for of how I got into it. But
Oh,
yeah,
I think that's good. Yeah, that's good to know. Like one thing that came to my mind when you were mentioning all that between the time you started and the amount of time that you devoted to whatever projects you were working on. Um, it's linked to this idea in my head about sacrifice, and about sacrifice being you need to it's needed in order to like bring about creation. Um, one of the books I've been going through, and I just finished recently, is that book that Nick Cave did with Sean O'Hagan, Faith, Hope, and Carnage. Um, I think Chad has read that book. I missed kind of the time he might have been talking about it, but um, one of
might
the
be right.
things that
I remember PVK saying he got a few chapters in and he had to stop because it's just so intense and he had to process it. Not that PVK stopped, but anyway, sorry, continue.
well, the audiobook is on Spotify too, if anybody if you have it or anybody else does, because um yeah, I think you get like 18 hours of free listening or something like that. And so it's actually read by the two of them. So it's their interviews that they're reading back, like the transcript in front of them, which is kind of funny. But it's really good. But one of the things that's mentioned is talking about, he had some kind of major losses in his life as he's kind of going through these interviews. It's a few years after both of his sons died. One of his closest friends dies towards the end of the book when they're recording it. And I think his mother dies also in the process of these interviews. And so he kind of goes over that. But one of the things he'll talk about both is personally, Nick Cave is very into um, religion for partially for ritual purposes of like having structure. He talks about how that was part of the reason why he did heroin when he was younger, was because it provided a certain type of rhythm to his life that he felt like, oh, I have like, you know, this time that I like relax and then I crash, I get it back up, I do whatever I need to get more heroin, and I do it all over again. Um, and he sees that religion has that same purpose for him now that he's not doing that. But then also talking about the creativeness that comes out of some of these like really horrible situations that have come out of his life. His wife started like a designer brand after their son died. Um, and it was just like an explosion of creativity out of this horrible situation that neither of them could see coming in. Um, and so just thinking about this, like uh, both of these are sacrifice is not completely the word, but there's a certain level of that, like out of something breaking or like voluntarily or not, um, choosing what to do in that situation, and how there are opportunities that are not obvious, but that often it's creativity that comes out of those. And sometimes that's little and sometimes it's a big one. And I've found that recently, like in the little places, I'm not very disciplined and my life isn't very structured. But in the places that my life is structured, I found that those are the places that I find the most inspiration or uh, I don't know, creativity kind of coming out. Like, oh, I start to have ideas about things. I mean, for example, like the last few weeks, I've been trying to learn how to write poetry, and The only place that I seem to get new ideas for poetry seems to like almost always be in church. Like it's like in these moments where I'm like, oh, this is like one place I have to sit down and I have to be like quiet and not looking at my phone or anything else. Um, and it's that, and then I think like in the shower or the bath, right? Like there's a certain point where like, okay, I'm also like not doing anything else. I'm gonna like be quiet and sit here. And so um yeah, it's hard. Yeah, thinking about that as a form of sacrifice, but I don't know. Those are just some thoughts that came when you were saying that. I was like, oh, that's something I've been thinking about. But yeah.
Yeah, no, and it still happens to me where I get ideas in church and my initial impulses say, "Oh, my initial want is I gotta get out my phone, I gotta jot this down before I lose it." And I remember initially when I had my when I had a religious experience and I was going through this conversion process and all these ideas were flowing in where the emptiness was created of like my previous way of thinking about the world had been blown apart. But especially during church, these ideas would all fly into my head, and over time, I realized that like, oh, if it's a good idea, it'll pop back up, like it'll percolate back up. I don't have to get out my phone in the middle of mass and jot it down. And if it's a good idea. And if it's not a good idea, then it'll sort of time will sift it. And that's almost an act of faith in the moment. It's like,
Hmm.
oh, okay, so God might be testing me with this, but also he's letting me know, okay, like keep doing what you're doing. You know, like there are fruits of your let's say faithful pursuit or whatever you want to call that.
Yeah.
So that became a game to me, or almost funny. Uh, Actually, one of the in the game I'm making that I'm working on making, um, like the most important breakthrough I had actually happened in the middle of mass, and it's even worse. It's even crazier than you think because in that mass I'm the cantor. I'm singing, so
Hmm.
like either I'm singing or like I'm paying attention to the mass to
Hmm.
like make sure I'm singing at the right times and that I'm following it, but also like I'm also like present in the mass. Right. So like
Yeah.
I'm really doing three things. I'm singing, I'm paying attention to make sure I'm singing at the right places, and then I have to actually like celebrate and focus on the math. And then during that, I have this idea pop into my head where I'm like, this is the answer of what I've been thinking about for a week. Like, just like, come on now. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Uh,
I think that that relates to you hear about people who are on the kind of the verge of sleep. I think it was like Einstein who would have like he would hold a coin over a cup, and as he fell asleep, the coin would hit the cup and he would wake up, and um like it would be a way to try to find these answers that he's been trying to look like think through. I remember one time I was doing this like horrible programming homework. It was called Bit Basher. And what we had to do was basically write like really like short C code to solve certain problems. And I remember there was one that was just like I couldn't think through. It's like, 11:30 at night. I'm like, I need to just go to sleep. And so I just like turn off all the lights. I close my eyes. And then within like 5 minutes, I'm like, that's the answer. And so like in the dark, I'm like trying to find a pencil, just to, like write it down so I can go to sleep. Um, yeah.
Trying to find a pencil instead of your phone. What is this, 1973?
No. I was like, I can't stay up. I'm too tired. Um, but yeah, it's I think that that goes in with the ritual bit too of like there's a I don't know, getting outside of distraction maybe might be the way, like being present in something and being able just to kind of lean into it.
Yeah, and that was something else that I found is that within Catholicism, there's something called Eucharistic adoration. But where I found that to be most useful to me is I have to sit in a room with nothing else to do for an hour. And
Hmm.
the whole idea behind Eucharistic adoration is Christ in Gethsemane saying to his disciples, "You couldn't stay with me for 1 hour. You couldn't stay with me and awake for 1 hour." And but sometimes there as well, but usually that space allows me to process, let's say, the pain and the suffering, and not so much anymore, but um, it allowed me a space to process like how I was doing holistically in my life. And, how was I doing as a father? How am I doing as a father, as a husband, in my job, in my church life, etc. Um, and in that processing in the space that I can't really do anything else, then it sort of I felt like it sorted me out such that it gave my mind freedom to wander at other times, if that makes
Hmm.
sense. Um,
Definitely.
yeah, it's kind of is it was almost it's maybe like a weekly thing where it's like breathing in and breathing out, where you do it and you do it once a week because you probably do this like daily too. But for weekly for me, I mean, I feel like my life is definitely in a weekly cycle, in that Sunday, yeah I sing at one mass, I play drums at another. I know I'm a weird Catholic. I've made that point before, uh, but like that's, and then everything else is structured around that weekly cycle, like when I'm doing Eucharistic adoration or when but what's cool about that is it gives me the structure I need to feel like I'm doing okay and have it's almost like, if you think about it from programming terms, it's like I have a recursive algorithm that runs each week,
Hmm.
and I have routines built into that recursive algorithm that are checking to make sure the all the steps of the algorithm are acting appropriately. So a step of the algorithm daily is like, what am I doing daily for as a father or as a husband or all that. And so like I have the algorithm self-correcting, but then there's still space in the cycle to allow for like random stuff to come in. And that's the part that can't be coded. That's like the right brain left brain divide, where your left brain is just running on autopilot, systematizing not autopilot, but it's like systematizing things automatically almost. And
Hmm.
then your right brain is like, ooh, shiny, like what's that, like, oh, poof, you know art. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, it gives freedom to kind of do that. When you're constantly going in chaos, you're having to kind of create however you're going, your response is, you have to be very proactive with that. But when you give the freedom to kind of, I don't know, lean into the left brain, then your right brain has more room just to kind of flow.
And I
Yeah.
think it's both. I think it's both. I think like I think a lot of creative types think that, and this probably plays into Nick Cave and the heroin stuff. I'd be interested in hearing from his perspective. Was he most creative when he was, my guess is he was probably most creative when he was in his heroin stupor, because there was nothing else to do. Now he might regret that. Obviously like that might not be something he wants to freely admit, but I'd be curious to ask him, like, because either he's performing and
Hmm.
doing things where he has to just like do it, and that's really the left brain for the most part, or he's getting new ideas and thoughts and melodies, and maybe he's so strung out on heroin that he can't even write it down. But that's just a guess on my part, and that's honestly, that's probably one of the reasons that so many geniuses, I would say musical or artistic geniuses, turn to those sorts of drugs, because maybe it's the only time where things are quiet enough or calm enough in their life where the art has to, or the art is able to come into them. And it's almost like the alternative to that is exactly that. It's the religious. Jung said something like that. He said, uh, religion is necessary. I forget where he said this. Maybe I'm actually picking this up from Peterson quoting Jung, but it's like religious practice is necessary to stop the mystical experience, or to prevent, you know, there's something about the discipline
Hmm.
that is a necessary counterweight to pure abstraction, or it's almost the same dichotomy in Christianity of like we are not expected to be resurrected as like spirits or angels or whatever. Like we are embodied creatures. Like the body, the physicality of what it means to be human is essential. And
Hmm.
I suspect the reason for that is the necessity of keeping us humble. Like remember, you take a shit every day. Like
Hmm.
remember, this is what's within you. Like, and uh that humbling of like you're actually not that different from a bacterium. You started roughly the same size as a bacterium. Or so it's humbling, but it's also showing the glory of God. It's
Yeah,
like
I'd say it's like a
look,
meeting of the two,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like
It's like
it's
go
you're
ahead.
you're also complete, right? Like that's how it started too. Like
Mhm.
I mean, if you're gonna go to Genesis, the good creation is still the embodied physical experience
Yeah.
of these first humans, and then um, the brokenness is there too. So to have, both are together,
Mhm.
um, and the perfection isn't completely changing it. It's um, it's still both together.
Mhm. Yeah. It's that necessary contrast, perhaps, um, that the light has to shine in the darkness. And yeah, that's really interesting. There's something else that popped into my head when you were talking about. I got to read my notes through my microphone, which is always challenging. I could hold them up. Here are my notes. Can you read that? Probably not. No. I'm just teasing you. Um, have you ever heard of the show Babylon 5?
I've heard of it,
Okay.
but yeah, not too
Um,
much.
so when I was probably 12, 13 to about 18 is when it was coming out. And I would say single-handedly it in terms of like if you talk about set or about culture generally, like colonizing me or affecting me who I am today, it's probably the single most impactful show on me. Like it was Babylon 5 is what began. No show was doing this before Babylon 5. Babylon 5 is what began the long form serial show. And
Hmm.
Star Trek Deep Space Nine was coming out at the same time, and they were sticking with their single episode, or sorry, yeah, single episode storylines where you could just watch an episode off. And three-quarters in or two-thirds into DS9, they had to change their model and launch into this war where every episode built on every previous episode because Babylon 5 was being so successful with. So there's like the first season of Babylon 5 is mostly character building. There's a few like important plot points, but most of it's character building. But the second, especially second season through the fourth season, it's like all one giant arc, like incredible space opera with like the fourth season crescendo is just it's nuts. I don't want to spoil it. It's so good. Even still, but there's a captain in Captain the Space Station Babylon 5, and he had a quote that I remembered. And when you were talking about pain, suffering, sacrifice, but the quote is, my father always taught it's he's talking about his father. He said, my father always taught me that's the only way you deal with pain. You don't fight it, you turn it into something positive. And what's ironic is that the creator of Babylon 5, a guy named J. Michael Straczynski, he was raised Catholic. Now he's an atheist. I think he's still an atheist, but it's kind of like that Tom Holland thing where the show is full of his Catholicism, even though he's an atheist writing the show. I'm looking at the show now. I'm going like, man, like I was raised Presbyterian, and
Hmm.
that show might have a significant, like I don't know to what extent that show played and and me being drawn to Catholicism. I don't know, but it's like it's all over. But
Hmm.
the but Ray being raised in the tradition I was raised in, we did not have the same focus on the redemptive nature of suffering in
Hmm.
that like when the cross, so just simple example, when the cross is displayed, it's just a cross, it's just the cross, right? Or it's like Jesus going like, come on in, everybody, everything's good, right? There's no, so they take the crucifix, and it's like, well, the crucifix is like, this is us, but this is what our Savior did for us, but this is also us. Um, and so I don't know. I found hope and light even in the darkest times because of that, because it's like, yeah, this is what it means to live. This is it.
Yeah.
So, and what, yeah, yeah, sorry, go ahead, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, well, you saying that quote reminded me of, I'm a big fan of this band, Me Without You. And they have a song that heavily features a quote from the poet Rumi. But the line is, the cure for pain is in the pain. And it's just one thing that's just been like, I don't know. It kind of like the puzzle piece kind of like fell down and fit. It was like, oh yeah, that's what that is. That's
The minute you stop running away from the pain and you just kind of face it is the minute it doesn't stop, but it's almost like the battle is won. Like, thought about the prodigal son in that regard. Is he saved when he runs into his father's arms, and or is he saved the moment he decides to get out of the pig pen? Or is it both? Is it both and, um, is the kingdom of God a place, or is it a process? Is it a dynamic versus so one, and then we don't have to talk about this, but and I'm kind of putting you on the spot with this because I haven't mentioned this to anyone, but I would be interested in you ruminating on this and maybe for a future conversation, because this I think requires a lot of thought. So as a programming guy, I'm sure you're familiar with concept of Booleans, bools, true and false, and then float, or let's say, you have you heard the term normalized float, like a float from 0 to 1? It's just it like
okay.
it's got a value from
Mhm.
0 to 1. Like it's just like 1 would be fully true, and 0 would be like fully false, and it's like a spectrum. It doesn't have to be normalized. Like a float will work just fine.
Yeah.
So here's my intuition I wanted to share with you, and this is the thing that I think needs to be ruminated on, is that within philosophy in general, the transcendentals, so the good, the true, and the beautiful, they're usually treated as Booleans. The good, the true, the beautiful. That this is beautiful, this is not. This is true, this is not. This is good, this is not. And my intuition is that those three things are actually floats that scale up to infinity. And it's almost like I wouldn't even say a normalized float. Like it's a infinite negative float and an infinite positive float, almost. And the further up and further in you go, the bigger the float gets. It's almost like a what's the word? Exponential curve, I guess.
Yeah.
But so it's like, so let's say something that's beautiful, that there is a, and this is actually what I'm wrestling with right now in terms of my channel in game development, but there's a quality to them. There's a quality to the transcendentals, and but even worse, there's a quality that cannot be quantized. So even though I think of it as a float from like 0 to infinite, but because it's infinite, you can't really quantize. You can't say like, oh, it's a 5 beauty. Like you can only quantize it in relation to things of the same type. So if I say to you like, okay, Noah, what's more beautiful, like the beautiful church that's over here, or the beautiful let's say music, or the beautiful, it could be anything, right? Like so how do you compare two things that are in completely different realms of categorization, but yet there is a quality to them? Like there's so I don't like people who say there's no such thing as bad music or no such thing as bad art. I'm like, bullshit.
Yeah.
That's not true. Like That's not true. Like, I feel like you're wrestling with this too.
Mhm.
But yeah.
Well,
Any,
and what
yeah,
do you
any
mean by
thoughts?
bad too, I guess is the other question, right? Like,
Oh yeah.
I think to a certain extent, bad art is art that is not worth the time and attention you give it.
Mm.
Like, there are
Okay,
plenty of movies
so
that, yeah,
but let's make this more complicated, right? So any individual one piece of art of my daughter, right? So let's say you can still hear me, right? If I
yeah,
project,
I can.
let's say the Christmas tree.
Mhm.
Like if I made an equivalent level Christmas tree, me myself, you'd say, Neal, that's awful. And then if my daughter makes it when she's two, like 2 years old, you'd say like, whoa, that's insane for like a 2 year old. That's really good, right? So
Yeah.
there's already a now I would say someone who's on the okay, so this is interesting. Someone on the autistic spectrum would say,
Mhm.
no, there's no difference. It's bad even for a 2 year old.
Mhm.
That's what they say. It's almost like the transjective relationship. So it's the relationship between the receiver of the art and the art itself to the extent that someone is attuned to the relationship of the two, they can more accurately reflect the totality of the value of the art.
And does that make room for the context too, on which it was made, or
Yeah.
what it's
Okay.
pointing to?
So
Because that's
no,
another
no.
piece.
Yeah. Oh man. This
Yeah.
so this scales all the way up, right? So let's say my daughter doing it at a particular place at a particular time that I remember that's salient or important to me. Or but let's say then I take that one piece of art and I make a mosaic vision of Tom Lukeson on the wall, and then I'm like kind of celebrating, let's say, her art. And then yeah, so the it scales, right? And then she does the same thing at 3, let's say, or 4, and we can compare it and say like, oh, look how you've grown in your artistic endeavors or abilities. And her eyes light up and it's like literally today. So this happened. This is why I was late to our call, actually, because I had to bring my daughter over to grandparents' house, where they live like 8 minutes away. It's really convenient. So but I was talking to them a little bit, so I was running a little bit late, and I was like, oh, this gives Noah a chance to forgive me, and it's great. I love giving people a chance to forgive me. It's like, oh, moment of grace, poof, yeah, let's do it. No, that's sort of true, but I'm a weird Christian. Yeah, give him a chance to forgive. Anyway, so but I was talking to my daughter on the way over to grandparents' house, and I asked her like, how was your day today? And she's like, good. They moved me, they changed my table from this table to that table, and she's sitting next to a new girl. And I know for a fact that this girl was one of two girls who were sort of like bullying her at the beginning of the school year. And she would come home and she'd cry, and and my wife and I were basically talking like, I don't think it's because it wasn't affecting her outside of the school. It wasn't like it wasn't changing who my daughter was as a person. So I wasn't too worried about it. And I was like, no, let's just kind of coach her and to wipe the dust off her feet and try to play with other kids and like have her deal with it. But anyway, so I talked to my daughter about it, and on the car ride, and I said, so it was still a good day at school, even though, this girl had been bullying you. And she's like, yeah, like once you get to know her, she's pretty, pretty, I don't know, cool, or, easy to play with or whatever. And I said, and then I mentioned the other girl's name that was bullying her, that they were often a pair. And I said, well, what about this other girl? And she's like, oh yeah, same thing. Like once you get to know her, she's doing fine. And I know that this other girl was like driving her to the point of tears on multiple days, multiple. And my daughter was saying this so nonchalantly that they're just like friends, and I'm like, don't you remember like 6 months ago you were coming home every day crying, like every day, and now you're just nonchalantly being like,
Yeah.
oh, we're just good, we're friends. And I'm like, that's awesome, that's amazing. And like, but my daughter hadn't really considered the bigger picture, I guess, but like maybe she had. But I'm like you got to feel gratitude. That's like opportunity to lean into gratitude. And you see like this little smile like getting bigger on her face, where she's just like, yeah, I guess God is pretty good. Yeah. But anyway, so that happened today. But anyway, but that's why am I telling this point? I guess I'm in a happy mood because of that. So God wanted me to be in a happy mood to come into this conversation because this really good thing happened. But I guess I'm giving you that example because that's like a goodness that just scales up, right? Because it's not just that she had a good day at school, it's that she had a good day at school in relation to this other thing, which was really not good. And
Yeah.
I could see the journey, I could see the trajectory, I could see the story. I mean, obviously she knows it, she could see it a lot better having lived it, but I want her to, how do I say this? I want her to embody or live into the entire story, not just that this was a good day. You know, I want her to take that into consideration with the entire trajectory, the entire journey. So anyway, it's that beauty that scales. Yeah. Anyway.
And I think there's the other side too of like, I don't know, I'm thinking about some of these like more modern art pieces that were like totally on this context or narrative around the piece itself.
Interesting.
There's a piece of art where it's a pile of candy that is on the ground, and it is like vaguely kind of not human shaped, but it's as long and as wide as a human is, and it's the weight of this person's partner right before they died of AIDS. And so there's like this kind of bit about it, and like people are free to take pieces from it, but there's kind of a
Wow.
story being told through that.
This is my body, it's broken for you.
Yeah, there's a certain, yeah,
Do
definitely.
this in remembrance of me.
And there's also a piece of like kind of sadness as this is kind of being taken away from this person, like nothing is being left. And it's this incredible narrative that's being told through this. At the same time, it relies almost entirely on the context. Like, you need to know the story for it to make any sense, because if you told anybody on the street like this is what this art is, that or not, this art is just a pile of candy on the ground, and don't tell them anything else, they're gonna be like, this is I don't know, this is kind of stupid. And so
Well,
I think the best art kind
Yeah.
of hits on multiple levels. Like, it's both the narrative, but then also to a stranger, they can also see something else that's going on. That's why I think music is really powerful. It's because music hits your emotions initially, and then you can dig in further than that. But that's just my thoughts on that.
No, so that's what I wanted to ask you. So like that piece of art that has, like, if I stumbled across that on the street, I would say, what the heck is this? And I would, now me being trained as a modern Westerner would probably realize that whatever is being done here is art.
Mhm.
But that's only because of my context as a modern Westerner, where I realize that art is often expressed in strange, in atypical ways these days, let's say. But I compare something like that to like the first time you enter a cathedral. Or here's another example. First time I ever saw a real night sky, like a clear night sky. I'm sure out west you probably have more opportunity for that. Like if you go up in the mountains, or I don't know if you live in a mountainous, but like
I wish
yeah.
I saw the night sky even semi often, but not where I'm at. But someday I'll get the chance to.
Yeah, it wasn't until I was like 11 or 12 that I actually saw a real night sky. And I remember I was playing Manhunt at it was like a Boy Scout camping trip, and it was probably like 9 or 10 o'clock, and it was completely dark, and we were 100 miles from any like major city, maybe, yeah, probably 100 miles from. And we ran out into this clearing, and I remember looking up and I just stopped. Like I just stopped. And all my friends were like, what are you doing? They're gonna get us. Like we gotta go. And I was just like, you guys go. Like just so I don't know, for whatever reason I was just stopped, and I was just, because I don't know. I like it's so I look at things like modern art, and I doubt its value. Like in some ways, if art doesn't hit me, just hit me, and if I don't have an uncontrollable response to art, like I'm not in control of it, then to me that feels like the dividing line between like, or the first time you start playing a video game, and at first you're like, what is this? And then it's just, whoa, this is like a particular game, or a particular, you're just in it. Like is this uncontrollable? But then to your point, it is a dance back and forth, because you have to go further into it, and then you allow it to open up more to you, and then you go further into it. And sorry, yeah, go ahead.
No, yeah, I think that's been this. I don't know. I think people might not like that. I'll say this, but I think there is times where you have to learn to like certain types of art. Like there's a point where you have to know the context enough to be able to be like, okay, I see what this rock song is doing, or this rap is doing. That they're drawing these connections between these two kind of very disparate genres, and they're bringing them together. If you don't know where they're pulling them from, it's going to sound like nonsense to somebody who's uninitiated.
To someone who's not in TLC, all my beautiful art on Tom Lukeson is going to make zero sense.
Yeah,
But if
exactly.
you know about it, well, I'm just kidding. It's still funny, I think.
I think there is like there is something that will be funny, but it's not going to hit the same way as everybody else will see that.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Sorry, I interrupt a lot. I interrupted your thought on
no worries.
the need to lean into art, the
Yeah,
need to really, yeah, go.
and so it's this constant interplay between the two of like both trying to there's a grander narrative at play, but then there's also kind of the instinctual reaction to anything you see, or an emotional reaction. And I don't know. I think if you hear certain types of music for the first time, even if you're not familiar with that type of music, you can still have an incredibly strong reaction to it, for many different reasons. I think horror movies might be up there as being like one that people might not think about, but like uh, they don't often need context for anything. Like they're just doing their thing, and maybe they'll kind of draw on ideas, and then there's like an underlying narrative of they're playing with certain ideas from other genres and stuff like that. But in the core, they are trying to elicit a certain emotional response, like a visceral emotional response from people. I think that's probably one of the easier ones
Well,
to point
that's
to.
that. No, I think you're absolutely right. And I think like the horror is a great example, because it hits you on that immediate visceral level, and you don't have control over it. But then the question always is, and this goes back to my quality question, like the good, the true, and the beautiful, like what are they qualitative? And I think this is it, is that, so something that is superfluous art, it hits you on that visceral level, and you dig, and there's just nothing, and you dig, and there's nothing, and you dig there, and there's nothing, or there's nothing to dig. You dig it, and that's a joke. But an art that, so a good game will have the replayability, let's say, or have the ability for you to explore alternatives, and to go back to like the video game example. So I take, there are certain games that I think are some of the best games ever made. Like Minecraft is close to the top of my list there. And so why do I think Minecraft is, if not the best game ever made, one of the best? And it's because of this nearly infinite paths that are still meaningful and beautiful. It's
Mm.
because it kind of gives you a simple path, but then the opportunities for doing something that are unexpected are kind of through the roof. And you've just seen that blossom over the lifetime of Minecraft. Obviously there's less now because it's a very thoroughly explored medium. But I think that way about Unreal Engine. Because to me it seemed to me like Unreal Engine was just like one level up from Minecraft, in that Minecraft, people are already putting together complex switches and logic gates and all that to make very sophisticated behavior happen, especially if you play modded Minecraft. And Unreal Engine's like, it's really not that more complicated. And so you've got, anyway, I'm sort of taking this in a different direction, but I was thinking to myself, like, you got 5 million kids that play Minecraft. If even like 1 million of them have any interest in taking it to the next level, Unreal Engine should be or any game engine for that matter. But But sorry, let's stick on art. I'm getting sidetracked.
Well,
Yeah,
I
go
do
ahead.
want
Go
to
ahead.
kind of hit on that a little bit. Like, I think I think Minecraft has this, but then a few other games have this. I think the buzzword is emergent storytelling. This idea of like being able to play a game, and there might be some writing to the game, but the best part of the game is that um, stories develop that weren't necessarily intended by the creator, and the gameplay itself lends to that in a way that you're excited to tell somebody who has never played the game about what happened. And that's happened a few times to me in games, and um, that's a major sign of like, oh, this is like one of the great ones of being able to have that.
No, that makes a ton of sense. What came to my mind with that is, I don't know if you've ever played World of Warcraft, but back in the day, us old people, that's what we played. We played EverQuest, and even before that, we played Ultima Online. No, I never played Ultima Online or EverQuest, but I was addicted to World of Warcraft in college. Absolutely. There's one summer where like I deliberately avoided getting a job or an internship because I just wanted to play World of Warcraft for like 16 hours a day, and I did. And thankfully, at the end of that summer, I was getting tired of it. Thankfully, and then it somehow worked out. But like anyway, that was probably the worst I ever had it. But in World of Warcraft, there was something called the corrupted blood incident. It's very famous. You ever hear this?
I don't think I
Uh,
have now.
so there was a debuff that it was like a ongoing tick that would take your life off. But you could only get it when you went into an instance of a raid, basically. So you'd have a
Hmm.
25-person raid in this new zone called Zul. I think it was Zul'Gurub zone. But anyway, it's like this jungle zone, and you got like mosquito bites, and everybody had malaria while you're in the zone. So there was like, and it was like malaria that sort of like scaled up. I think it got like more. So it was almost a race against time that you had to like complete before it. And the bug was that uh, somehow players were keeping this debuff when they left the zone.
Hmm.
So then they would go back to like a major city, like a major town, and then everybody else would get this debuff, and then they would travel to other towns, and then they would get the debuff. So you had a virology study on our hands of like how viruses realistically spread. And people actually study this in World of Warcraft because you had these, it's like 1,000 people all playing on the same server. And yeah, it's fascinating. You can look up corrupted blood incident. But I mean, they fixed it pretty quick, but I'm sure for at least like several hours, if not days, it was still an issue. Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking of another, like, I think some games are also just lend themselves to that in the mechanics themselves of like providing a tool set, kind of like you were saying with Minecraft or like Unreal Engine, of like handing you a bunch of stuff and then your job is to find out how it fits all together. And one of those is I haven't played the first one. I've played a lot of the reboots, but like Deus Ex, because I know you mentioned that before, but it very much lends itself to that of like um giving you a bunch of stuff and just saying like, okay, solve your the problem that we give you in any way you want.
Uh, no one has asked me about my moniker, Daedalus, but where it originally comes from is the original Deus Ex.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, uh, yeah. I don't like. I kind of want that to just wait and come out organically. There are many reasons behind that being my moniker or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, no, the original Deus Ex is extremely near and dear to my heart, extremely in a variety of ways. Yeah, yeah, I don't even want to go into the myriad of ways, but yeah.
I still need to play the first one. I started it and then I think the first time I tried it, the port to like modern PCs, like when you went underwater, your frame rate went to like 5. Um, so I need to play it. I think I have a version that fixed that problem, but I just haven't sat down and done it yet.
Yeah. I mean, it was one of the first games to give you the ability to solve a problem or a level in multiple ways. I think Thief
Yeah.
before that was doing it. But like, and there were very few 3D games. There were only a few years of 3D games before Deus Ex. It was like Quake in '96, and then no, maybe Quake was 98. I forget. The original, and there was Quake 2, and there were, there were some other 3D games. Half-Life came out a little bit before Deus Ex, but Deus Ex combined like pretty good graphics and storytelling at that time, and characters actually moving their mouth. That was a major innovation when characters moved their mouth when they talked, and
Yeah.
it combined that with kind of open-ended it wasn't an open-ended story, but you had multiple paths in an individual level to complete the level, and then also you had different I think there were a few kind of ways that you could navigate uh to complete, so like you could, the best games around that time, that you were always changing sides. You were always switching sides in the middle of the game. Something, and I played a bunch of games like that, but the good ones would always make it so that you could delay that switch for a while, or you could do it early, and then you would have a different middle of the game, basically, based on whether you delay
Yeah.
it or, yeah. So,
Well, yeah, that's been part of what I've enjoyed most out of games is a flexibility of being able to both like in your gameplay be able to not play, if I want to replay the game, I don't want to play the exact same character or have the exact same play style. But I also want to not sit through the same cutscenes all over again. I want to explore the different ways this narrative could play out. And so there are a few games that tried. I think Dishonored was like a huge one for me, like pretty early on, of being able to like have a bunch of different options, but then also have some sort of control over like the endings of the game. But yeah, I could go into more, but yeah, those are the things I tend to look for.
We're generationally, we're just a little bit too separated, where I was I had my favorites by the time in high school. I played a lot, but that was middle school to high school, I would say. So about 1995 to 2003 for me.
Okay.
And
I'll think of something that links a little bit better. I think I played through the first Baldur's Gate. I've tried the second one, but I never like got super far into it. But that first quest in Baldur's Gate 2, where they say like
get out of the
basically
dungeon, Irenicus.
or sorry, the second one. Your I forget her name, but your friend is in jail. Imoen's in jail.
Yeah.
And you have to make money to get her out.
Yes.
And however you make money, whatever. Like you just make the money, and then that's your quest. And then you can, and the open-endedness of that is like, I don't know. That's what I'm looking for in video games, is like just give me a crazy goal, and then just say like, okay, however you want to do this, do it. Go for it.
I think I only mentioned Baldur's Gate 2 like once, and did you remember I mentioned that? Because okay, man, okay, you are attentive to detail. That's awesome. So no, but that's in my top 5. Yeah, no, exactly that. Where, and there's, man, yeah, exactly. Like that game unveiled to me the potential of games and storytelling. Now, the new Baldur's Gate that came out, I haven't played it because, oh man, that's a good question. I said this to Chad. We don't, yeah, I feel there's so many strands to this conversation we could just go down. Like I said this to Chad, and he's like, really? Like what I'm about to say to you. And I felt kind of sad, but I don't really feel sad about it. It's like, even if I know something's good, I can't get into it. I find it like, I find like I'm almost forcing it, or like I'm almost like faking trying to get into it. Like I feel like a poser trying to get into it.
For
Even
games
if
specifically?
for games, for TV shows, for movies, for and this has been growing on me the last few years, and I think it's because of there's the common canned answer of like, oh, culture's going to hell in a handbasket sort of thing. I actually don't think it's that, because there's plenty of good quality, like the new Baldur's Gate that came out.
It's really good, but
yeah, I know it's really good. I know. And I think it has more to do with the fact that the adventure of my own game, of making my own game, and now the adventure of TLC, that those things really matter. Like they're really meaningful. Like they are, like I don't know what kind of game and I'm excited about the game I'm working on, and I don't know what the limits are of it. And I know there are limits. I know I won't be able to do certain things, but I'm also exploring things that I haven't seen any game do. And I don't feel like you go to Disney World and you have a constructed adventure. You have a prepackaged adventure. And a game as good as it is still a prepackaged adventure. Um, and even Minecraft or something, like you're still now part of part of the part of the game that I'm playing with game development is like I'm making a game, which is a game in and of itself. But then there's that game that's including it as part of my channel. So how does including my game, like there's a nested structure, right? There's the making of the game. And then there's a game of the problem solving. Okay, let's go all the way down. There's the game of the problem solving of the specific issue that I'm trying to do. And then there's the game of how does that specific thing fit into the overall strategy of the mechanics or whatever. And then there's the game of the game itself, like how is the game going to play? And then there's the game as it's nested in the structure of my channel, and are people actually like excited about what I'm doing or or even like remotely interested in what I'm doing. Um, and I'm also playing another game with my channel, which is the game of how much do I do tutorials versus how much do I talk like what I'm actually thinking about in game development versus how much do I show gameplay. And I don't have that much gameplay yet because it's still I'm 6 months in, prototype still. But like that's going to change over the next 6 months because I'm actually going to be able to like play. So that game is like, that's exciting. I don't know how I'm going to navigate that game. And then there's the broader game of like, how do I feed in my channel and game development into TLC and the other stuff I care about and like make these two. And that's a game because like, oh, maybe I'm tricky. Maybe I do this. Maybe I drop hints. Maybe I do branding while I'm doing a live stream on my gaming channel. And people are like, what's the Friday morning Nameless? I'm like, well, like, and I'm doing all these. So there's games within games within games. And then it's like fitting it within the game of my life, and then the game of like having these conversations with people, and it's just all these levels of meaning that are stacked on top of one another that it's not prepackaged. I have no idea where TLC will be in 5 years. I have no idea where game development will be in 5 years. And bottom up ecumenicism, the things that we're doing, the connections that we're making, the PvP server of, as Grim would say, like it's freaking awesome. Like so like a prepackaged movie, how awesome it is still like I know that this is an experience that's prepackaged that ends, that that ends. And I think it's probably also at the point where I am in my life and being through some darkness, let's say, and I just haven't gone through that. There's one exception to this rule, and I don't know why it's the exception, but I do know why it's the exception, but it's The Chosen, which is a show, and I'm like not that many people are really into The Chosen that I've seen in TLC, and I love it. Like I went to
I don't get why that's the case exactly. That seems really
what
odd to me. Oh, that people aren't
that
into
people.
it. Yeah.
Well,
I,
one is because PBK doesn't want to talk about it because he doesn't
he hasn't
they
watched it,
did
has he?
no, and it's
Yeah.
because and I understand why. It's because, in Calvinism and that tradition, they're far more wary of the false idol. Like, oh, if I see Jesus on the screen, then all of a sudden people are praying to Jonathan Rumi, the actor, and not praying to Jesus. Whereas within Catholicism, we don't have that same issue per se. But I've got a lot to say about The Chosen. I don't know if you've seen it, but
Yeah.
or followed
I've
it, but
seen the first 2 seasons. I still need to catch up on the last two.
yeah. And I kind of want to avoid the topic simply because Chad and I are probably going to be talking to Food Truck Emily. Yeah,
Oh,
and
okay.
she's a big fan of The Chosen too. I just have to be
Mhm.
careful that I don't accidentally make her tear up. I bet that'll happen, but then I'll try to tear up and it'll be good. So because there are certain scenes like
Oh yeah.
I was sitting, yeah, and I went to the season 4 stuff in theaters with my father-in-law and a priest friend who's like 90 years old, and I looked to my left to the priest who's 90, and like at certain points like he's like crying and bawling, and at certain points I'm crying and bawling, but it's hitting me at different times in different ways than it's hitting him, but I don't know. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's I know why it's having the effect on me, right? Because at those times in the movie theater, I would just look up and I would just say, you know, thank you to God. I was just hit with this overwhelming gratitude of God's love. And I know that sounds corny. I know that sounds so corny, but like once you believe you're actually participating in the ultimate story, like once you believe that, that's awesome. Like it's like, let's go. Like
Mhm.
we're in the story, bro. Sorry.
Well,
I get carried away. Yep.
and I think that's why I think I'm a little surprised by you saying that you're uh I'm trying to remember how you said it, but that like it's not connecting in the same way. Like other art isn't connecting in that way anymore of like
Oh,
um because I see all of this depending on how well it's done. I think good art is the stuff that connects to the transcendent, even indirectly. Like it's in this conversation that's going on.
yeah.
I think that's why Dune is now like is this interesting place where not just in TLC but like across the culture. I'm just seeing like everybody's talking about it in a context that's not about necessarily the what Dune is about, but like the next layer up.
Mm.
And there's you can see these trends of interest that are kind of going through, and I'm like, oh, there's work that this is doing in the culture. And it's not sure what it is, but there's some good it's doing, at least I can identify. But who knows like what the ultimate trajectory is. But that's part of the interest for me is even if something isn't popular, it's there is everything is part of a grander conversation.
Yes. Okay.
Um, and so that's at least what keeps me interested, if anything. Um, but yeah, that's at least that's the way I see it.
Yeah. No, I bet part of it is just in the amount of time I have to really
Yeah.
lean into something. And so if
Yeah.
I bet, so if the corner was my natural inclination is to be rather punk rock.
Mhm.
In that like when everybody in the corner was talking about Jordan Hall, I'm like, we got to get out of the hall. Like it's too much jordanhall.com. Like let's get it. And now that Jordan Hall, the new hot chick, is no longer being talked about. Now I'm actually listening to it because now I can just focus on what he's saying, and I find
Yeah.
I really like what he's saying. For the
Mhm.
most, like I haven't listened to that much yet, but like yeah, but like I don't know, my natural inclination is like, oh, everybody's going that way. Oh, I better go this way. But like
Yeah.
now I think of TLC as my people. So like if they even even when PBK's talking a lot about the Collinses, this was maybe a month. That was like the last wave of obsession. That was like 2 months ago. But yeah, like I could see why he thought they were interesting. And they did bring some new nuggets to the table, even though they're radically different than the spirit of TLC. Um, but that's part of the awesomeness of PBK is that he has the ability of weaving things in that are way outside the norm of what's to be taken seriously in religious circles, and yet his faith is such that he's not threatened by those things, but he can separate the wheat from the chaff, and he can see how even the parts that are, let's say, anathema uh to good being, I would say, how they can enrich the rest of it because you can see it helped me see where I'm different and why I'm different and look at my journey and give thanks for my journey
Mhm.
because I have a sense of where those alternative journeys can end, especially if you're led to believe that it's the proper path or the right path. I'm not really making sense because I don't want to badmouth the Collinses, so I don't want to just come out and say like this and this and this. But I don't know. Seeing their path and their journey gave me a lot of gratitude for my own path. A lot
Mhm.
of gratitude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think yeah. In their case, it's looking for something that I don't know. I don't have to. I don't have that same struggle. Like I don't have to think through those same things.
Yeah.
The feeling of having to build something from scratch is like, yeah, I don't know where I would even consider starting that. That sounds absolutely terrifying. And yeah. But I think you were talking about the way you were talking about PVK. I think that's been one thing that I've thought is funny looking from the outside. Somewhat like as a lurker and then kind of coming in. But I think people underestimate Paul a little bit. Like
Oh yeah. Oh
he's a
yeah.
troll. He is a troll through and through, and he says it, but like I don't think people realize like um he knows exactly what he's doing, and he'll play dumb sometimes, but it's like no, like he knows how to push people's buttons. He knows who's gonna get mad, and he knows. I mean, I'm going back to Rick Walker coming onto that live stream, right? And it's like he knew that like this is going to cause a firestorm and that people were gonna react strongly.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm. In the
but
same
also
way they
knew
reacted strongly to the Collinses. Yeah. It was almost
exactly,
like two sides of something totally different.
yeah. What was it? We sung a dirge for you, but you didn't cry. We played our songs and you didn't dance. There's a certain level of like are you not satisfied with either with either side of this? Like
Are you
what are you
not
looking for?
entertained?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a I don't know. That's one thing that I've been trying to pay attention to too is like uh a certain level of control over a situation. The I'm reading through Analects by it's not really by Confucius, it's about Confucius because it's all like after his life. But some of the notes beforehand is talking about this like non-action or like passive action of this kind of complete control over like being able to like seem like you're doing nothing and then it just kind of working out. And that seems very much kind of the what's at play here is like you know exactly which way things are going to go and you can just kind of mindlessly kind of put things together and push people in the right way.
Well, I find that if I'm thinking too much about a conversation, that's the difference between an interview and dialogos, is
Mhm.
that an interviewer is trying to get something or has a predetermined path, whereas my style is I have some generalized topics, but then I'll do Luke Thompson circumambulation, I and I also think in terms of relationships. So this is my secret weapon. I always talk about this, but my secret weapon is like I'm not trying to actually get any information from you, Noah. Like what I'm trying to build is transjectivity over the long haul. So what that means is everything I want to say, it has to just come. It's the corny way of putting it, but it's not my head, it's my heart, for
Mhm.
the most part. And sometimes what comes out of my heart can be bile, can be really bad. But that's one of that's really, I think, the reason that I felt it's time to come out of the lurk because and I mentioned this on my initial randos conversation. I've mentioned this a couple times, but I journaling, and then part of that journaling process became the writing of this story. And but like as I felt the need to write less and less and less, it was really the resentment within me that led me to need to write. And then as I felt the need to, and don't get me wrong, there was definitely like a lot of the writing that was just like creative and good and cool. And but like the resentment, the anger, the bitterness, the whatever, that was the impetus, that was the psychic energy coming, that pushing me to actually do that. And as that was diminishing, I'm realizing, oh, I'm not exuding anger or depression, or I'm not exuding, I'm no longer exuding things that are going to wear people down, that are going to bring people down. And then so it's that combination of like, oh, uh, now that I've given up a lot of this baggage, let's say, now it's like, okay, maybe someone can like actually help me climb up because they're not pulling all my baggage. Also, they're just helping me. And maybe I could do the same for other people. Like maybe I can just be like this secret joy guy who's like, yeah, Tom Bombadil. We're all gonna be fine in the end. Like, no. But that really is, I don't know why I'm talking about this. It's related to like action that's not an action. Because I'm not trying to do anything specifically with you. Like I'm
Mhm.
just Ken, you
Yeah.
know?
Well, it's trust, right? That's kind of like
Yeah.
the key of it. Um,
Yeah.
being willing to say like, I know what the right thing to do is, and I'm just going to kind of sit with it and know that like whatever happens, like I'm doing what I'm here to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Somehow, and I don't know how this is the case for you. Don't let this go to your head, what I'm about to say. But you have the maturity of a much older man, or person in general. So I think I mentioned this on the Ron Copperman conversation. It's like when I was your age, if I was doing this, I would feel like now I would look back on myself and be like, man, I was so fool I was so foolish. But I look back on my old Facebook posts and stuff, and I think, wow, I'm just this foolish kid, and um I don't feel that way about you. So I think you're in the right space at the right time, exploring in the right ways. That's the sense I get watching you, and I think it's really cool. And I think it's also really cool that you sense what's going on here, is kind of in that same excited anticipation. Not that we're looking to get anything, but just we have a sense that what's going on in here is really good and it's new and it's a good thing, and just a willingness and a desire to participate and be part of it. I think it's really cool. So yeah.
One of the things I've noticed that's been kind of weird lately,
Mhm.
has been I've been looking at YouTube analytics, and I think there's some of it's unreliable just
Mhm.
because you don't know what kind of information people are kind of sharing about themselves with Google.
Sure.
Um, but most people who watch my videos uh, kind of are like either they're older than me, basically. Like I'm looking at the statistics and like
Yeah,
significantly like
I'm not sure.
not super
Not
older, but
surprised.
like yeah, they're in the next bracket over. And I don't know, it's odd because from everything I know about other people who make things, that tends to be the opposite. It tends to be one generation makes things like entertainment or whatever for the next generation. That tends to be the order of operations there. Um, and it's just kind of an odd point that I kind of noticed, and I was like, I don't I don't know. I don't want to choose who I'm talking to. I guess that's one thing. I don't want to like actively like target and be like, no, I don't want to target you anymore. I want to. So I'll keep kind of going where I'm going right now. But that was kind of like a surprising thing. Like, oh, um, I don't know. I don't know what I provide for people who are older than me, but we'll see.
What about your peers, like your friends or family close to you in age, or or do you find that you prefer having friends older than you?
Ooh. Um,
Like, are you
I don't
married
know.
to
I
a
think
50-year-old woman? That's a
I'm
joke,
not, but
but
I think there is a kind of vibe that both me and my wife often I don't know, we often feel like we're kind of caught in between places.
Yeah.
We're both kind of um we sound old in the way we talk about things,
Mhm.
but we also get like extremely frustrated by like millennials we work with. And that tends to be like the
That's me,
yeah.
millennial.
Well, you're one of the good ones. You're right.
Thank
But
you.
yeah, but and some of that still plays out. And so I don't know. I'm still kind of cheering for Zoomers, but at the same time, I don't always feel like I relate super well. And how really depends. But I do have a lot of people who I have friends, and they're usually like 1 or 2 years older than me. Um, and then maybe like a year younger or less, and that tends to be kind of the range of people I'm friends with. Um, but just because school and it's easier that way.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's cool. So you're still in graduate school now, or are
Oh
you?
no,
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 no. Yeah, yeah.
it's just mostly friends
That's
from
good.
school. So
Yeah,
I'm
yeah. I got you. Yeah, that was the case for me, but then I moved to Wisconsin and for a job, and then I didn't have many friends, and that's when I learned to play drums and played a lot of World of Warcraft Arena, and got up to like rank 2600 or something in 2v2, 3v3, 5v5. I got very good at it. Very good at something that didn't have much practical application, but it did teach me a lot about working together with a team and having a close group of friends doing something together and just having a great time doing it. So I don't look back on oh, that's another thing I did want to talk to you about, because I feel like a lot of the corner, a lot of it has this disdain, and this is, Christians in general have a disdain for games
Mhm.
as a waste of time, and that they're not adding any value. And, despite me completely admitting my addiction to various games at different points in my life, um, one way of saying it is like I was just really, really passionate about this thing. And I spent as much time with this thing. Now, given it's false idol, but I spent as much time at this thing as I could without interfering with the parts of my life that were required in order to continue my passion with this thing. you
Mhm.
know and so in my mind, I look back on that now, and it's like it's way better to have a false idol than zero idols. It's way better. Like when Jordan Peterson talks about it's better to get moving in some direction versus just sitting there.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, so yeah, what are your thoughts in relation to video game addiction, and how can we frame this in terms that those that have concerns, and what separates the addiction from something that's constructive? And I have some ideas,
Yeah.
but yeah, why don't you go first? Yeah.
Well, uh, well, personally, part of my journey with video games has been like I don't remember a time in my life where I didn't have video games, right? Like from a really early age,
Yeah.
I was playing video games. Um, my brother was born when I was about 3 years old, and so uh, as like my present from him, that his parents do, they gave me like a whole bunch of like little kid PC games,
Mhm.
and so even from that age, like I was PC gaming, and so to me, video games are just like another form of like artistic engagement. So um the same as like watching a movie or reading a book, there is an engagement with art, but the medium just isn't the same. And so that would be my first kind of thing, where it's like games are addictive because of how much they kind of address the person themselves, I think. um they're very capturing in that way. uh who was it? I think Christian kept talking about the immersiveness of games.
Yes, I remember that.
um and I think there is an element of that, and that might be part of the addiction part. I'd need to think about more about that part of it, but I think it's just something you need to be careful with, like anything else. Like it's like everything is a tool, and the dose makes the poison. And just like like in some medical procedures they use cocaine for certain reasons. That doesn't mean that cocaine is good to use.
As you said that, I rubbed my nose.
But yeah, yeah, exactly. Like it's there are things that you can use games for that I think are not good at all. Like they're very not good for people. And I don't know. I've seen games that are like wildly immoral, but I've also heard of books and know of books that are extremely gross and immoral. And you just have to look up Marquis de Sade's Wikipedia page to to know that. But
Well, I think of games similar to, well, I think everything you said I resonate with. But when Peterson talks about, okay, our ideas have to die so that we don't. And it's like, would you rather have your
Hmm.
child kind of play a game as a nihilist and seeing where that goes, or playing a game as a psychopath and seeing where that goes, or taking on psychopath tendencies directly or nihilist tendencies directly? Um, and it's kind of this, like, we have this need to like put on these different clothes or mustaches, but put on these different roles to let us experiment and try things out. And I think games for me allowed me to do that in a lot of different ways, and figuring out like what I liked and why I liked it and who I was like and why I was like that. Um and yeah, it was a journey of self-exploration through all of that. And also knowing, being able to see what my, let's say, worst addictive tendencies were,
Hmm.
and what I needed to watch out for. I think one of the reasons that I fell in love with my wife is that I realized that with her, like, I would not, no matter, like, the where I could be right now is I could be a 38-year-old man, overweight, parents' basement, Cheetos, playing games all day, like not talking to anyone except through that, and complaining about the state of the world. That's who I could be right now. But my I knew that wouldn't be the case in marrying my wife, because she's so extroverted, she's so outgoing. Like all of my worst tendencies of like, I just want to stay in and be a homebody and not doing it, except be lost in my own little world. It's like she and what I found is that I've become steadily more extroverted in my life because of her. I think in no small part because of her. And I think, and she's gotten more introverted, and she'll read books, and I think maybe because of me. Like, I don't,
Hmm.
like, not that her interests are because of me, but just her kind of uh personality has changed, and I like to think maybe a little bit because of me, but um, you know, uh maybe I'm flattering myself, but I think she's definitely gotten more uh introverted and introspective and self-aware in some ways. Um, and I wanted to float something by you and see what you thought of this, because you said, well, two things real quick. One was that you said gaming from a really young age, that you were doing it all your life. You can't, and that was something remarkable about my upbringing at the time, is that from the time I was born, 1985, I had two computers in my house. I had an Apple II and an Amiga, and my father was a programmer. And back then, they would just copy game. There was no piracy protection. They would just copy and exchange floppy disks,
Hmm.
and like, so I had like hundreds and hundreds of these games that I would play from like age 3 up, maybe even like younger than 3 for all I know. So I fell in love with them like you, very early young age. I didn't get a Windows computer until I was 10, Windows 95, and that just like, because then there were like way bigger games and like cool graphics and stories. And anyway, um but in relation to art, and this is where I differ probably from everyone in the corner, except for maybe you and a few other people. But I think games are, I'm going to say it, I think they're the highest form of art, or I think they have the potential
Hmm.
to be
I think
like,
that's much closer.
yeah, okay, the greatest form of art. And the reason I say that is because when sculpture or painting began on caves, cave walls or whatever, um, it wasn't super refined. It wasn't the Renaissance yet, and that's where we are with games right now. We are 50 years into games as an art form. So
Hmm.
they're still really in their infancy as an art form. Um, Not to say we haven't had amazing games like Minecraft or StarCraft, or all the crafts tend to be really good. I don't know why, but they tend to. But it's in its infancy, and here's the reason why I think they are going to be the highest art form, or they are, but they're still just an art form. They're still just an abstraction. They're not the end all and be all. That's the danger. Anyway, the reason is because all other art forms can be included in a game. And the reason for that is because games, to the extent that they're good games, this is me Neal, what I think, to the extent they're good games, they are emulating something real about our existence. They're emulating something to the best of their ability to emulate that resonates with our own being. They wouldn't captivate us such if that wasn't the case. So I think the really good games have, yeah, basically the really good games are a microcosm. That's a good way of putting it. They're a microcosm of reality
Mhm.
in that they're not the potential of everything that life has to offer, but they capture something in its essence, whatever that idea is. There has to be, so a really good game has to have a hill to stand on and a hill to die on. Like Minecraft, free flowing creative building, free flowing creative building. I don't know much about Roblox, but free flowing creative building Minecraft does in spades. It's like, and make it easy. Does it better than anything out there
Yeah.
that I know of.
Well, also it's participatory. Like it's,
Yeah.
and I think that's the major kind of component of games that distinguishes it from any kind of modern, depending, but from most like modern art forms. Uh, I've been kind of trying to keep an eye on, well, I played D&D a little bit. I think that's another major one of like one of these like um, participatory group storytelling kind of tools. In China, they have this kind of new wave of initially started out as like murder mystery games where a bunch of strangers will and you can go in groups, but like people will go as strangers and they'll enter um
Like a
like an
haunted
area
house or
together.
something.
Kind of, but they basically were playing D&D.
Yeah.
They're given their characters and they all sit at the table or something, and maybe they'll have like sections they can go through, but maybe they just have cards that represent evidence, and then the
I, I
person is leading this. Have you seen this?
I literally just played a game like this at a table maybe 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago.
Oh,
So
okay.
and I'd never encountered something like it, but it was pretty neat. And then
Yeah.
I had to go home early, and one of the other dudes died pretty fast. So I was like, okay, you're gonna take my life force, and then I went home. But it was pretty neat.
Yeah. But yeah, just the like the interesting role of like the person handing out evidence and seeing the way that people are talking through stuff and saying like, oh, this is the time for this to come in to play. Um, and computers can only do so much. And I think you could maybe see this kind of improving with time, but um, the ability to kind of take that experience and put it into a solo experience is also incredibly interesting. To be able to say like, we're going to simulate what it's like to be around other people, but you're not, and you have the freedom to kind of do what you want and act as you will, and we'll simulate what the response will be from people, and you can play this out. um, but yeah, we haven't explored participation too much. I think like the oldest versions are like, the like you were saying, like campfire stories and things like that, but I don't think we have too much of that.
Well, sports are like that. Sports are the
Mhm.
original participatory game. Um, and sports develop their own, liturgies, and it could be something as simple as like archery or, the Greek Olympics or whatever, but especially team sports, I think. Yeah. Uh,
Definitely. I've been guilty of um reducing my definition of art sometimes, where like I'll be like, no, it has to be like within these bounds, and then I always get criticized by my art friends.
what do you
um
think about Peugeot's idea that art has to be attached to some pragmatic purpose? Basically, that art, it's not even pragmatic. It's more so that art needs to serve to bind things together, like the art of war, the art of this, the art of that. So the art of it is the ability to use it for some higher purpose that brings it together. The art of good game design is to bring all these pieces of game design into a cohesive whole that serves something greater than the individual parts, let's say.
oh, I think it's right. I think I'm just I'm still learning it. Like I think there's going to be a point where it kind of hits, but like right now in my head, I have a hard time getting out of this. I don't know how to put it other than like maybe a fundamentalist view of art as being like it has to be like
You've hit your sacred. You've got your sacred. Don't tread
maybe
on my
maybe
yeah.
yeah. I'm trying to push back or push at it because I don't think it's right.
Yeah.
Um,
But when I heard you say in one of your videos, this was interesting. And I only have a few more minutes here, but maybe we could talk more about this and you could in a future conversation, you could think about it a little bit. But because I heard you say that you don't know what you want to do exactly, but you
mhm,
know that you want to create art.
mhm,
And to me, that's like a word, you know, like I think I settled on game development for a few reasons that I knew I wanted to do it because games have resonated more than any other art form in my life than anything else. Like I've spent more time and loved like fallen in love with games more than movies, more than books, more than so that's something that I knew. And then in conjunction with this story, this particular like just grabbed me and I couldn't. So it was out of my control. It wasn't something that I was like I gotta. So so yeah, like what is it that's within your definition of art is? What is it within that definition that is grabbing you? That is saying you, Noah, have to come here.
ooh.
It's pulling you up the mountain. So what is the mountain that's pulling you?
Oh no, I think it is the real definition, but it's me with my with my closed mind around this being like, okay, and that's been it. I think this is one thing where I'm like, I don't know. It's weird to say I know I'm wrong about this. Like I know that like my mind needs to like have it finally break, and it's constantly just like I'm just trying to stretch it a little bit further and be like, okay, well, like this is an extremely limited understanding of art. So is my essays that I write kind of in private or whatever, and it might turn into a video? Is that art? I'm like, okay, I guess it is. I'll accept that, and then like having to go from there.
Okay,
Um,
here's another question.
yeah.
Was the crucifixion and the week leading up to it, was that art? Was Jesus saying like the snake on the pole, like Moses lifting the snake and the pole in the desert up so that everyone can see it? The Son of Man must be lifted up in order to draw all men to him. What's the point of art if not drawing all men to it? Good art draws. That's what it does.
Mhm.
So wouldn't the highest of that be the thing that ultimately draws? You don't have to answer that. It's a
Yeah,
trick
no.
question. You can think about it for a while.
And I don't like the word performance art because it gives the impression to me that there's something fake, and so I'm trying to avoid that too.
Here's some performance art. There you go. It looks like I'm not wearing any pants right now, right? Everyone just listening to the podcast turned on their screen. I'm wearing shorts. It's hot down here in New Orleans. Calm down. Y'all are good. It's rated PG. Actually, that's not true. I used the S word a couple times. It's probably PG-13.
That's
I
still PG.
apologize for that. Really?
No,
Yeah,
yeah,
and standards of
yeah. PG.
I,
Well, no,
I,
PG used to be,
yeah.
crazy, and then
Although
it's gone back up.
I look at some movies that I considered like PG movies now, and like Home Alone 2, like, and I was starting to watch it with my daughter. I'm like, this is so violent. It's so like the
Yeah.
level of violence that's considered normal in my upbringing. Anyway, that's another topic that we can.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, I feel like maybe that is a good place to stop, and I also feel like I've talked too much, but at the same time, I have the intuition that your eyes have lit up a few times, which might lead to subsequent awesome conversations.
Oh
And
yeah. We have plenty to talk about.
yeah, and I also feel like we were able to touch on like a lot of things, like maybe like five or six things that I haven't been able to talk to anyone else that I've talked to yet. And
Mhm.
I've been able to talk about those things with you. And so that gets me like, hopefully you can see that in like my disposition, but I'm like really excited to keep these conversations going. So
Yeah. Me too. Yeah. Well, don't. we'll get back to evaluating art, because I know that was where we kind of went off the rails, and I do want to return to that eventually. So definitely.
Sounds good. Sounds great. Okay, so I will hit the stop and stay on for a few minutes, and I'm gonna send this. I think we're gonna yeah, I think we're gonna put this on Noah's channel. And yeah, actually, let me make a plug before. So everybody, go to Noah's chat if you're watching this on, because we might release it on the Nameless, the one and only Nameless. We
Friday
might
morning
release it
Nameless.
there. Yeah. That, well, people need to find it on Fridays, and it's like one of those channels that only shows up on YouTube on a certain day of the week, and you can't
Okay.
find. It's like the rumor requirement. It's like, and
Yeah,
no,
only when
that,
you need it, it shows up.
it shows up. Exactly. That would be
Yeah.
awesome, actually. So I chat real quick. Chad and I had this discussion where he's like, what if I have to monetize the channel? I'm like, you don't have to. And he's like, yeah, but what if they make me? Then I'm like, no, they're not going to make you. You don't have to. But he's like, well, what if we just like delete the channel and then we start a brand new channel that no one knows about? And I'm like, Chad, they're all going to find out about it right away. And then we'll have subscribers again. And he's like, yeah, but we'll just delete it again. And then we'll start a new one over here. And I'm like, Chad, like, it's not going to work. You just don't worry about it. We had this discussion.
Don't let Mammon in. Don't let it in.
Yeah, exactly. Threat of Mammon always at the gates. But anyway, so it's gonna be on Noah's channel, and everybody, I recommend starting with the Fallout video on Noah's channel. If it's just this, man, I thought you did it beautifully at deconstructing how stupid nihilism is. Like, it was just, and then you mentioned to me like, oh, some people still say, well, I'm still a nihilist. Well, like, you make it idiot proof and they make a better idiot. That's
Yeah.
basically how it goes. So, but you're you're doing some cool stuff. I've been impressed. So anyway, yeah, we'll keep talking.
Yeah.
And I talked way too much, so I apologize.
I'll go on a rant next time.
Awesome.
All right, some
All right, signing off with my performative art, y'all.